Hello. Hello. Hi. So welcome back, everyone. We'll continue the discussions now on the heavy-duty sector. Hello. Hello, hello. Trying to grab attention. Here you go. Hi, welcome back, everyone. We'll start now the discussions for pathways to zero emissions to conclude this heavy-duty track of the second day of the conference. For those who are here in the morning, we had some discussions on low emissions, OBDs, technologies to how to balance different technologies, SCR, EGR, LNT, and other technologies that are possible to be applied for heavy-duty engines. And now we'll talk about other ways to achieve zero emissions in the European market. So we'll start with a presentation from Carlos Calvo Ambel. He's a policy analyst at Transport and Environment. I'm sure he introduced the company as well. So for those who are not familiar with Carlos, Carlos joined TNE in 2015 after working at the DG Climate Action in the European Commission. And previously, he was a climate change consultant. And now he's part of TE's Freight and Climate Change, where he works to improve EU climate tools, and he coordinates the organization's analytical work on several topics. Carlos studied environmental sciences in Seville, Spain, and completed a master's degree in public administration at the Columbia University. So Carlos will present a roadmap to climate-friendly road freight and buses in Europe. So Carlos, thank you very much for joining us. And yeah, go ahead with the presentation.
Thank you, Fabrizio. Thank you for the opportunity to present here our roadmap. Compared to what we talked about this morning, I'm going to talk about something that is quite different. I'm not going to talk about the details of any technology. I'm just going to put some thoughts out there on how we think the future should look like and what different technologies can contribute to help to reduce land freight transport emissions in Europe between now and 2050. So first of all, for those of you that don't know what my organization does, Transport and Environment is an NGO based in Brussels. We are around 25 staff members, but in fact we are a federation of NGOs all over Europe that have an interest to make transport more or cleaner and also safer. So all of our members work at a national level with that goal in mind, to make transport cleaner and safer, while we focus on EU policies. And obviously for that reason, we need to be based in Brussels. We have been around for 27 years already, and we hope to be around for many more. So here you can just see a map of the different NGOs that are part of our membership. So this report that was launched last week that you can find in our website, what it intends to do is to put some thoughts out there to see what different technologies could contribute to reach zero emissions. And basically, it is not that this will be the future. This is not a forecast. This is just a study that tries to make people think, like tries to make, for instance, the Commission to put forward a low-carbon freight plan in the following years. So this is what I'm going to talk about today, but I prefer to go directly into the content. I guess this timer had to be working, but it's not. So I guess that I can speak until during the rest of the day, but anyway, I will try to focus to my 30 minutes. So if Fabrizio, if you can tell me when I'm running out of time because the timer is not working, that would be great. Okay, so now I got 3 extra minutes because I just started counting now. So why did we do this study? we did this study because we look into what the targets of the EU would need to be by 2050 in order to meet the Paris Agreement. Some other speakers mentioned it this morning, so we need to go limit global temperature or the consequence of climate change by maximum 2 degrees, and we need to pursue efforts to go to 1.5 degrees. So we did a study last year that looked into what the targets of those sectors that are not included in the emission trading system, so mainly transport being the largest, agriculture, buildings, small industry, and so on, what these sectors will need to deliver by 2050 if we want to meet the Paris Agreement. And unless we rely on technologies like carbon capture and storage and other technologies that will deliver negative emissions in the EU, basically we will need to go to zero emissions by 2050. And within those sectors, there are some sectors that cannot decarbonize, like agriculture. So when you use fertilizers or when you grow livestock, these sectors always produce emissions and they cannot decarbonize. They can do efforts to reduce their emissions, but they cannot decarbonize. So with that in mind, basically transport needs to go to zero by 2050, which is a massive, massive challenge, as you might imagine. For passenger transport, there are some solutions that theoretically have the potential to fully decarbonize the sector, like electric vehicles, but first we need to decarbonize the grid, or we can do both things in parallel. But for land freight transport, it is not so clear. So that's what we try to do with this study, to put out some numbers on what the different technologies could contribute with. Transport, as you can see, these are projections from all European member states. The blue line on top, transport with existing measures is not going to reduce its emission. So obviously, we really need to take some measures if we want to decrease them, and especially if we want to go to zero. So this study was commissioned by Norway, which is currently holding the presidency of the Nordic Council of Ministers, because they wanted to discuss this very topic. So we prepared this report so they could actually debate among environment and transport ministers what a strategy could be to decarbonize land freight. I'm gonna cover the report overall, but if you have specific topics or specific questions about the specific topics in the report, you can tell me. I was coordinating the report, but if you have very detailed questions, I will report back to some of my colleagues that were working on different aspects of the report. So to do this report, we took as a basis a model developed by the ICCT, the International Council for Clean Transportation. We tweaked this model. We put quite some effort in developing a specific European model, what we call the UTRM, the European Union Transport Roadmap Model. And this includes all European Union countries plus Norway plus Switzerland. Basically calculates well-to-wheel or also tank-to-wheel only emissions from all transport modes. So the model takes as an outside variable things like GDP and population. Then in the case of freight, we have not observed yet a decoupling between growth in economy and freight demand. So that's an assumption into the model. Then it seems it considers what amount of vehicles, what would be the load factors, like many of the parameters that you see in the screen, to calculate what would be the fuel demand to deliver that transport demand and what would be the emissions associated to this initial economic growth. I will skip this part. So we're looking into 2050, but for 2030, the EU already has some targets. And these targets for sectors that are not included in the ETS, like transport, there are already some targets. I'm here specifying those for the Nordic countries, but for instance, for Germany, it's also quite high. They need to do minus 37% in comparison to 2005 by 2030, of which transport will also need to do around the same percentage. And as you can see, the emissions from trucks, according to data from the European Environment Agency, they're actually not going down except after the financial crisis, but they are actually going up. They went up in 2015. So, first of all, we developed what we consider a business as usual scenario, what the emissions could be if no new measures could be introduced. You will always see two graphs in the screen, one for the Nordic countries, another one for the EU28. Please focus always on the graph that you see on your left. So we took assumptions of what will be the population development, the growth of GDP, etc., and this is the result. The graph on the left is how emissions, CO2 emission equivalent from rail freight, trucks, and buses will be in the EU by 2050. Within trucks or heavy goods vehicles, you can see there are two different categories. The gray one refers to trucks that are above 16 tons, while the light blue one refers to emissions from trucks that are below 16 tons. So if we do nothing, we assume that land freight transport emissions will considerably grow around 40% by 2050 compared to current levels, mostly because there is a growth in demand. So first of all, we look into what we call low-hanging fruit technologies could deliver towards towards achieving zero by 2050. Here is obviously very summarized. For more details, please refer to the main report. But we made some assumptions that if trucks will improve their efficiency, where that will bring us by 2030 and by 2050. So the main assumption is that for large trucks above 16 tons, a 40% efficiency improvement was possible. Some references are included in the report, like ICCT studies that look into improvements that can be done to the engine, to the aerodynamics, etc. And for smaller trucks, we assume 25%, because there is not so much potential with technology that is already in place and that is cost-effective. As you can see, if you compare the solid line and the dashed line, for instance, the gray one, the one that is referring to large trucks, it reduces its emission, but it still is clearly not enough. It's not even close to what we will need if we want to go close to zero. So we look into other low-hanging fruits. We consider that there could be a modal shift from road to rail, but we were realistic. We didn't assume that so much can be moved to rail because there are limitations in the system. We consider that the modal share will go from 18% up to 23%, which is already a massive achievement considering that bulk goods are not like mineral oils or coal, are typical products that can be very well transported by rail. Those are going to be slowly phased out. And also, like this increase from 18 to 23% in a scenario where transport demand grows considerably is almost doubling of the current rail capacity. So this is already quite big. And there you can see what the contribution would be towards reducing the emissions from the different transport modes analyzed in the study. And finally, within the low-hanging fruits, that doesn't mean, low-hanging fruit doesn't mean that it's easy. It just means that it is possible with existing technology. We consider that through measures like road charging, fuel taxes, and so on, we could improve the efficiency of the logistics system overall by reducing the empty headings by 25% and by tackling demand around 5%. So all the low-hanging fruit together will bring us there, the dashed line. As you can see, is still far from zero. So what do we do? So we look into additional measures that could be implemented, and we wanted to know, according to our model, where they could bring us by 2050. So that's what we call the pathway to zero. And the first measure that we looked into was using clean electricity in land freight transport. Of course, the current grid will not deliver this many reductions. This assumes that the grid by 2050 is decarbonized, which means that there are no coal power plants, there are no gas power plants, etc. It's all renewables, or for the purpose of this study, because this is only about climate change, nuclear could also be in the grid, but that's a completely different debate that I'm not going into. So it assumes grid decarbonization. E-highways, what we consider was the maximum potential, and we have a speaker in an event in half an hour that will tell you more about this technology, but basically you have a highway, you have a truck that looks pretty much like an old trolley bus. It has a pantograph, and it could be taking electricity from the overhead wires. This is for the larger trucks, while for the smaller trucks below 16 ton, we assume that there was some potential to fully make them fully electric. There are already some models that exist today, but obviously the supply actually the demand as well is very low. But more is coming, and for instance, Tesla is announcing later this year their new electric truck. But again, these are mostly smaller trucks. And you can see that that will again bring us closer to zero. So you have, let's focus for instance on the large trucks. It brings us closer to zero, but not to zero. So what else can we do? So we also look into advanced biofuels. The problem is that the Europe and the Commission proposed already quite ambitious targets for 2030 as part of the review of the Renewable Energy Directive. So the baseline already includes quite an important amount of advanced biofuels. So we didn't consider that there was so much additional potential supply of sustainable advanced biofuels. So therefore, the difference between the previous scenario and this one is so small, because most of the available or potentially available advanced biofuels were already in the baseline. So again, not enough. So this is a summary of what I have told you so far. The red line is business as usual of all the transport modes considering the study together. Then with the implementation of the low-hanging fruit, which is basically efficiency of the vehicles, efficiency of the system, plus a bit of modal shift. Then with some electrification with technologies like fully electric trucks, plus the e-highways. And finally, the dark blue line with second-generation biofuels. This is a very important decrease compared to the business as usual scenario, but again, it's not zero. So what could you do to go to zero? Because, for instance, the truck that is running on the e-highway, when it is not on the highway, it will still be running on an internal combustion engine. So what this truck could be running on? So we look into two different possibilities. We look into, well, that's the amount of electricity that will be needed to deliver the pathway to zero within using the electricity, and then for that gap between the dark blue line and zero, if you will use power to liquids or if you will use hydrogen, that will be the amount of electricity that you could need. If you're not familiar with the power system, maybe these units don't tell you much, but that's a massive amount. And by massive amount, this is equivalent to what is produced in Europe, like 1/3 of what is produced in Europe today. Not renewable, all energy or electric energy produced today in Europe, just to cover this gap, will be needed from land freight transport only. Is this realistic? Probably not. And why did we look into some technologies and not others? Why did we focus first on what electricity can deliver compared to, for instance, power to liquids, which can only be done sustainably, or a hydrogen as well, if you use renewable electricity. Because if you are going to produce the hydrogen from natural gas, it doesn't make any sense, because then the carbon footprint is too high. And this graph shows what the efficiency of the different fuels are overall from an energy perspective. If you use electricity right away into your vehicle, the overall efficiency is 73%. However, if you produce hydrogen because you need to storage it, you need to convert it into electricity, there is the all the steps that you see in the screen, it only brings you down to 22% energy efficiency, while for PTL it goes even lower to 13%. So there are so many energy losses that you don't have if you directly use electricity into the truck. We didn't look into natural gas. Why? Because natural gas is a fossil fuel. Even if it can deliver some reduction, which is still is something that is debatable and that we can talk about as well, Ricardo Energy and Environment did a report for us, and it showed that in the best case scenario, a natural gas truck will be around 10% better than an internal combustion diesel engine. But then those that favor this technology say, okay, but we can use biomethane. True, but how much biomethane is available that is also sustainable? For instance, in Germany, around 50% of all the biomethane that is currently produced comes from corn, like corn grains. Is that sustainable? That's a big question mark. And finally, this study didn't focus so much on costs, but for that we use existing studies. For instance, this study commissioned by UBA, by the German Environment Agency, and we didn't want to focus only on what the additional cost of an e-highway truck would be in comparison to an internal combustion diesel truck. We wanted to know what would be the cost of the system overall, because it is cheaper to produce electricity than to produce hydrogen, or it is cheaper to produce electricity than to produce PTL. If you look at the second part in the left, you see that for gas stations and catenaries, you don't need to invest anything if you are going to use all power to liquids, because the gas stations are already there and you could use them. But on the other hand, the cost of producing it is very high. The same with the vehicles. But what we are interested in what will be the cost for the system overall, which is the last column. So the main conclusion of the study is, let's do the things that we can do, and we need to think even more. We need to think more because even if we do all these things, we don't go to zero. And going to zero is really needed if we want to meet the commitments of the Paris Agreement. So either you take more measures to decrease demand, and therefore everything will go a bit closer to zero, or you invest. Of course, there could be some PTL or some hydrogen here, but still the massive amounts of renewable energy that will be required would make it harder. You could even invest even more in e-highways. You could invest on research and development to ensure that when a truck is off an e-highway, it will be also running on batteries, which they don't exist yet. So there are different possibilities. Finally, some policy recommendations on what will need to happen in order to deliver the low-hanging fruits and also the pathway to zero. We can start by introducing new CO2 standards for trucks and trailers. We can start by establishing a zero-emission vehicle mandate for buses and delivery trucks. We can start by tackling demand by doing a good review of the Eurovignette directive that is currently on the table, being discussed in the European Parliament and Council. We could talk about changing fuel taxes. We could talk about zero-emission strategies for cities. We could talk about building the right infrastructure, because the Commission's approach has been so far to be technology neutral. But what is clear, and we will talk more about that in the panel, is that we cannot invest in hydrogen, PTL, e-highways. It doesn't make sense, because there are no public resources or private ones to build on all the possible options at the same time. We need to start thinking about picking winners. And then, of course, zero-emission liquid fuels can play a role, but as I showed you, the amount of renewable electricity that will be needed to run the whole system will be too massive. So they can play a role, but this role will be limited. And I will stop there.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Carlos? I'll start with one, Carlos. My understanding is that the low-hanging fruit options, they are the most viable and immediate options that alternative technologies that can be implemented. And then you have two scenarios. You have a business as usual, and you have a low-hanging fruit scenario. Where's the base case there? Do you think the most likely scenario for 2040, 50 is the business as usual, or the one with the most immediate actions?
Well, hopefully it's not the business as usual, because then we have a problem. If the business as usual will happen, I mean, if it is only land freight transport, it will be a limited impact, but if Europe overall increases its emission up to that level by 2050, then it's game over. And if Europe doesn't lead on climate change, no one else is going to do. So okay. For us, the business as usual scenario is not a possibility. And I don't think that's a possibility for anyone, at least for policymakers in Brussels. The low-hanging fruit are measures that are basically no-regret measures and measures that need to be taken if we want to go even close to zero. Those are non-brainers and things that need to be implemented between now and 2030 in order to go closer to zero by 2050. Because, for instance, just the time that it takes to renew the fleet is quite high. If you are still selling a diesel truck in a fully diesel truck by 2040, that means that truck will still be running around in 2050. Also, it will be running less kilometers than when it was new, but still. And if that's going to be the case, then we will need to run that truck with something that is zero emissions. Then it will need to be hydrogen. Well, hydrogen no, because you cannot just put it into an internal combustion engine. It will need to be something like PTL. But if we need to decarbonize the whole grid for all uses plus for transport, that's tricky.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, there's one in the front. Microphone is coming.
Just really a question about a very interesting presentation of the different possibilities. They seem to involve a massive amount of infrastructure building, both in terms of distribution of energy, but also in terms of electricity generation. So have you factored into your modelling the amount of CO2 generated to install that infrastructure?
The short answer is no. We will talk we will talk about the infrastructure in the panel at 3. You are right that, of course, to build the catenary lines, you need to put, I mean, the steel needs to be produced somehow, but that applies to all options. You know, like when you're building a solar panel, of course it has energy embedded, but over time, it compensates for the amount of carbon that had to be put into the infrastructure or into the electricity production and so on. So the alternative to not to do that is the status quo. And the status quo is to keep burning fossil fuels. And that's clear that that's not going to move us away from catastrophic climate change. So, yeah.
Wouldn't it be an important factor in choosing which route you follow rather than doing it or not doing it? Because that they're quite possibly quite different.
Yes, I agree, but maybe can you tell me more of what you think that's the case, and what different technologies do you think that would be more intensive in terms of infrastructure and so on, considering that... Okay, I lost control. Can I have my presentation back? Like, even if, for instance, for the PTL technology, you don't need any new infrastructure, but of all the options analyzed, that's the less efficient one, because there are many, thank you, there are many, many losses along the chain of its production. So even if you already could use the existing gas stations and you would not need new infrastructure, it is also the one that is least efficient. But I agree, to have a completely full picture, what you are suggesting is a good idea.
Okay. Excellent. One question at the back.
Good, thank you. It was an interesting study. Did you consider factoring in that there may be societal changes which mean we won't actually want to move so much stuff? You know, younger people don't want as many cars as we have. They're happier living in flats than we were. And they want their beer brewed locally rather than globally.
So the short answer is again no. We are not trying to forecast the future. We are trying to analyze what measures are needed in order to achieve the future that we want to see. Of course, if there is less transport demand because society starts wanting less goods, then this will be easier, because the red line, the business as usual without new measures, will go down, and then everything will move down. So that's also something that we need to start thinking about, that do we want to keep coupling economic growth and freight demand? So this is also one of the main conclusions of the study. That's something that we need to start looking into.
Thank you.
Excellent. So thank you very much, Carlos. We move to the next presentation. Thank you very much. Okay, so for this next one, as Carlos said, hybrids electrics are in the path to zero emissions.